My perfect sister cheated on her husband. When I exposed her, my family disowned me. But years later, she stole $180K from them and destroyed their lives. Now they're begging, but karma already won. I'm 29 years old. I work in business administration, and honestly, I don't know if I should be telling this story, but I need to get it off my chest because what happened with my family over the last few years basically made me rethink everything I believed about loyalty, forgiveness, and how far blood goes when it comes to family. I guess I should start at the beginning. When we were kids and my sister Megan was, you know, the perfect child who never did anything wrong. I grew up being Megan's younger brother, and for as long as I can remember, she was always the favorite. It's not like my parents were evil to me or anything like that, but it was obvious. You know what I mean? When Megan got good grades, it was cause for celebration, like my parents would call the grandparents and everything. But when I got the same grades, or even better, it was like, oh, that's nice, son, and they'd just go on with their day. Megan wanted piano lessons, and boom, new piano in the house. I wanted to play soccer, and it was, but that's too expensive, Christopher. Maybe next year. That next year never came, honestly. My mom had pictures of Megan all over the house, from baby to college, and there were like 3 pictures of me total, and one of those was a family photo where I came out kind of blurry in the background. It sounds like something minor when I say it like that, but trust me, when you live that every single day for years and years, it gets engraved in your soul. The worst part wasn't even the direct favoritism, it was that Megan learned to manipulate that situation from a very young age. If I complained about something she did, like her taking the computer from me or telling lies about me, she'd cry, and automatically, I was the bad guy in the story. My parents always believed her. Always. I remember once when I was like 12 years old, Megan drew on my parents' bedroom wall with permanent marker and told them it was me. They punished me for a whole month. No TV, no video games, nothing. Years later, when we were already adults, Megan admitted it at a family dinner, like it was a funny anecdote. Like, oh yeah, I remember I did that and blamed Christopher, ha ha ha, and my parents laughed too. I just sat there thinking, seriously? That's it? Not even an apology? But it was always like that with her. Everything was forgiven. Everything was charming. When we grew up, things didn't get much better. Megan went to an expensive university that my parents paid for completely, plus apartment, plus car, plus everything. I went to State University with student loans I'm still paying off, by the way. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I expected them to pay for everything, but the contrast was brutal. Megan studied graphic design or something like that, something she liked, but that didn't have many career prospects. And my parents supported her, saying the important thing was to follow your passion. I studied business administration, something practical with a future, and my parents said that was boring and soulless. Like, I literally couldn't win in any way. When Megan was like 26 years old, she met Jacob. And honestly, Jacob was, and still is as far as I know, an incredible guy. Super mature, responsible, with a good job in finance, treated Megan like a queen, and most importantly, treated the whole family well, including me. Jacob and I got along well. He'd ask me about college, about my life, things my own parents didn't do. They got married like 2 years after meeting. Big, expensive wedding that obviously my parents helped pay for a good part of, and they moved into a nice house in a quiet neighborhood. Everything seemed perfect for Megan, as always. By that time, I was like 24 years old and was dating Rachel, who's now my wife, but at that time we'd been together for about a year. Rachel was and is the best thing that's ever happened to me, honestly. She came from a normal family where they treated her well, and there were boundaries and consequences, and when I'd tell her about my family at first, she didn't quite believe me, like she thought I was exaggerating. But when she met my parents and Megan, she understood everything perfectly. I remember the first family dinner she went to, and Megan monopolized all the attention for 3 hours talking about her job and her house and her plans, and when Rachel tried to share something about her work, Megan interrupted her to keep talking about herself. Later in the car, Rachel told me, "Wow, your sister is something else, huh?" And I just laughed because I wasn't even surprised anymore. Things got weird with Megan like a year after her wedding to Jacob. She started acting different, like more distant with Jacob, but more dressed up and going out more often with friends from work. Jacob looked confused but didn't say anything. I guess he thought it was a phase or something. My parents didn't notice anything because for them Megan was still perfect. I didn't pay much attention to it either. Honestly, I had my own problems and my own life. But then one day, I think it was like in July 4 years ago, Megan asked me to watch her phone while she went to the bathroom at a cafe where we'd met up. I don't know why she asked me to. Normally people take their phone to the bathroom, but whatever. The phone started vibrating like crazy with messages, and the screen would light up showing the messages because she didn't have privacy activated. And that's when I saw messages from some guy named Noah. I didn't look for them, you know what I mean? They just appeared on the screen, and it was impossible not to read them. They were super explicit messages, like things you definitely don't write to someone if you're married to someone else. Things about meeting at a hotel, about what they'd done the night before, inappropriate photos. I froze with the phone in my hand. When Megan came back from the bathroom, I must have had a weird look on my face because she asked me what was wrong. I told her phone had been ringing a lot and she grabbed it quickly, checked the messages, and went pale. Then she tried to laugh it off and say that Noah was a friend from work who was kind of intense but that it didn't mean anything. I told her, Megan, those messages aren't from a friend, and she got defensive saying it wasn't my business and that I didn't understand her situation. I asked her if Jacob knew, and she said no. That Jacob was boring and that she needed something more in her life. She asked me not to say anything, that she was going to handle the situation. I honestly didn't know what to do. On one hand, she was my sister, but on the other hand, Jacob was a good guy who didn't deserve this. I didn't say anything for like 2 months, but the guilt was eating me alive. Rachel knew something was bothering me, and eventually I told her. She told me I had to tell Jacob because it was the right thing to do, that if I didn't, I'd be complicit in the cheating. She was right, but I was scared of the consequences. You know, I knew my family was going to crucify me if I exposed Megan. The situation exploded at a family barbecue that my parents organized like in September. Jacob was there, obviously, and surprise, surprise, Megan brought Noah as her friend from work. Noah was that type of person who thinks they're charming, but who's actually super fake. You know what I mean? Making jokes all the time, being the center of attention, and the worst part is my parents loved him. They'd say things like, "Oh, how nice Noah is. Megan, how lucky to have such fun coworkers." Jacob was quiet. I think he felt something didn't add up but couldn't pinpoint what exactly. What finally decided me was when Noah started making inappropriate comments about Rachel. Like comments about how she looked, saying things like, "With that body you must work out a lot, huh?" and winking at her. Rachel looked uncomfortable and I was about to explode. I told him to shut up, and he laughed, saying he was just being friendly. Megan didn't say anything, just laughed too. My parents didn't say anything either, acting like everything was normal. That night, when I got to my apartment with Rachel, she was crying about how Noah had treated her and how nobody had done anything. I was furious, literally shaking with rage. I told her that was enough, that the next day I was going to expose everything. Rachel asked me if I was sure because she knew what was going to happen with my family, and I told her yes, that if they were going to choose Megan over me for doing the right thing, then so be it. The next day I went to Jacob's house. I told him I needed to talk to him about something important. Jacob looked worried, but let me in. I showed him screenshots I'd taken of the messages between Megan and Noah because I'd had the foresight to take them that day at the cafe, even though at that moment I didn't know if I was going to use them. I also told him about the barbecue and how Noah had acted. Jacob stayed quiet for a long while, looking at the photos. Then he asked me how long I'd known, and I explained everything. He told me he'd suspected something but didn't want to believe it, that he thought maybe he was being paranoid. Jacob thanked me for telling him, even though you could tell he was destroyed. I left there feeling awful but also relieved to have done it. 2 days later, Jacob confronted Megan, and she obviously denied everything at first, but Jacob had the screenshots, and eventually she admitted the affair. She said she was going to end it, and that she wanted to try to fix their marriage. Jacob told her he needed time to think. But here comes the part where everything gets worse. Megan called my parents and told them her version of the story, where basically I was a monster obsessed with destroying her happiness because I'd always been a jealous and bitter brother. She told them the messages were taken out of context, that Noah and she were just friends, and that I'd made everything up because I hated seeing her happy. My parents believed her completely, as always. They called me to a family meeting, like an intervention but backwards where I was the bad guy. I arrived with Rachel and there were my parents, Megan crying like a soap opera actress, and Jacob who looked uncomfortable but wasn't saying anything. My parents started yelling at me, saying how dare I make up lies about my sister, that I'd always been a problem, that I was ruining her marriage out of envy. I tried to explain to them that everything was real, that I had proof, but they wouldn't let me talk. Megan kept crying and saying I'd always hated her. I asked Jacob to tell them the truth, but he was in shock and didn't say anything. I think he didn't know how to process everything. My parents gave me an ultimatum. I had to apologize to Megan and Jacob for the lies, or they were going to disinherit me and kick me out of the family. Rachel tried to defend me, but my mom told her she wasn't part of the family yet and not to give her opinion. I stood up, looked at my parents, and told them I wasn't going to apologize for telling the truth, that if they preferred to believe Megan over me, then that was their decision. I left there with Rachel and haven't spoken to them since that day. Well, until recently, but I'll get to that. The following weeks were horrible. My parents would call to yell at me. Megan would send me messages saying I'd ruined her life. Relatives I barely knew would write, saying I was a bad person. The only good thing was that Jacob eventually made his decision and asked Megan for a divorce. He wrote to me, thanking me again, and saying he was sorry he hadn't spoken up at the family meeting, but that he was too stunned. I told him I understood. Rachel and I decided we needed a radical change. I was depressed. She was also affected by all the drama. And we basically said, that's it, we're leaving. We applied for jobs in other states, and we both got good offers. We moved, like 3 states away from my family, like really far. We started from scratch in a city where nobody knew us, and nobody knew about the family drama. The first months were difficult but also liberating. You know what I mean? Not having to deal with my family, not having to pretend everything was fine, being able to just live. Rachel and I became closer, obviously, because we basically only had each other. About a year after moving, I proposed to her, and she said yes. We got married in a small ceremony with friends we'd made in the new city, and some old friends who flew in to be with us. I didn't invite my family, obviously. It was the happiest day of my life. No drama, no favoritism, just love and support. Like 3 years went by without knowing anything about my family. I deleted my parents and Megan from all my social media, changed my number, basically cut contact completely. Sometimes, I wondered how they were doing, but honestly, I was better off without them. Rachel and I, we were building a good life. I'd gotten a promotion at work. So had she. We were thinking about buying a house. And then something happened that even today I have trouble believing. I was going through a McDonald's drive-thru, like a random Tuesday at lunchtime, and when I got to the window to pick up my order, the person who served me was Megan. I literally froze. She recognized me too, and went pale. I didn't know what to say, so I just grabbed my food and left, heart beating a mile a minute. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Megan working at McDonald's in the same city where I lived, 3 states away from our hometown. It didn't make sense. I told Rachel and she was just as confused. We decided we weren't going to look for her or anything, that if it was a coincidence, well, fine, and if not, she knew where to find me if she wanted to talk. Like 2 days later, Megan wrote to me from an unknown number. I guess she got my new number somehow. The message said she needed to talk to me urgently, to please give her a chance. I was tempted to ignore her, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet at a public cafe. When I saw her in person, I was struck by how different she looked. Megan had always been one to dress up a lot. Perfect makeup, expensive clothes, that kind of thing. But now she looked tired, with dark circles, cheap clothes, undyed hair showing the roots. She sat across from me and started crying before saying anything. Not the manipulative crying I knew, but real crying from someone who's genuinely in a bad place. She told me that after the divorce from Jacob, she and Noah had tried to be together officially, but that Noah turned out to be abusive, that he manipulated her, controlled her, and eventually hit her. That she'd left her job, that Noah had convinced her to move with him to another city, that he isolated her from everyone. That my parents had supported her at first, but that eventually Noah convinced them too to do something. She didn't want to fully explain at that moment. That she'd managed to escape from Noah like 6 months ago, and that she'd ended up here working at McDonald's because she didn't have recent job references or money or anything. She asked me for help, money, a place to stay, whatever. I honestly didn't know what to feel. On one hand, I felt sorry seeing her like that, because nobody deserves abuse, no matter how bad a person they are. But on the other hand, I couldn't forget everything she'd done to me, how she'd ruined my relationship with my parents, how she never apologized for anything. I asked her what had happened with our parents, and she got evasive, saying it was complicated and that they were fine. I told her I wasn't going to give her money or let her stay with me because I didn't trust her, but that I could help her find resources for domestic violence victims and shelters. She got angry, saying I was still the same selfish brother as always, that when she needed me I turned my back on her. I told her it was ironic she'd say that when she'd ruined my life years ago because of her own decisions. We yelled at each other for a while in the cafe until they asked us to leave. After that, I was uneasy. Something about what Megan said about my parents didn't sit right with me. I decided to investigate a little. I searched on social media even though they weren't very active, and I didn't find anything recent from them. I called a distant cousin who'd always been neutral in all the family drama and asked her if she knew anything. She was surprised I didn't know and told me a story that left me frozen. Turns out that Megan and Noah, like 2 years back, had convinced my parents to sign some papers where they transferred the house to Megan. They told them it was to protect the house from taxes or something like that they were still owners but that legally it was in Megan's name. My parents, blindly trusting Megan as always, signed without reading carefully or consulting with a lawyer. A few months later, Megan and Noah sold the house and disappeared with the money. They left my parents literally with nothing. No house, no savings, because they'd also convinced them to lend money for a fake investment. My parents now lived in a crappy apartment with what little was left of their pension, and the family was outraged with Megan, but nobody knew where she was. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I knew Megan was selfish and manipulative, but this was another level. She had literally stolen everything from our parents, the same ones who always defended her, who always put her first, who gave her everything. And now I understood why she was working at McDonald's far from home, because she'd probably spent the money with Noah, and when he became abusive, she had no way to escape with resources. I went to look for Megan again. I found her leaving her shift at McDonald's. I told her I knew what she'd done with my parents' house. She first denied it, then said it had been Noah's idea, that she didn't know he was going to sell the house, that everything was without her knowledge. I told her that was a lie, that she'd signed the sale papers too, according to what my cousin had told me. She started with how I didn't understand, that she was desperate, that Noah had forced her, that she was also a victim. I asked her if she'd ever apologized to our parents or tried to fix what she did. She said they didn't want to talk to her, that they'd rejected her when she asked them for help. I told her, maybe if you hadn't left them with nothing, they'd want to talk to you, don't you think? She started crying, saying I'd always been jealous of her, that now that she was doing badly, I was happy. I told her no, I wasn't happy. I was disgusted by everything she'd done, and that she couldn't even admit her mistakes. I left there feeling worse than before. I told Rachel everything, and she told me I should at least try to contact my parents to see how they were. I didn't want to, honestly, because they'd treated me horribly and thrown me away like trash for defending Megan. But Rachel was right that they didn't deserve what Megan had done to them, regardless of how bad they'd been to me. I wrote them a physical letter because I didn't have their current contact information. In the letter, I explained that I'd found out about what happened with Megan and the house, that I was very sorry about that situation, and that if they needed help or wanted to talk, I was willing to listen. I gave them my new address and phone number. I honestly wasn't expecting a response, but they called me like 2 weeks later. My mom sounded old and tired on the phone. She told me they'd received my letter and that they wanted to see me if I was willing. I agreed to meet at a neutral restaurant. Rachel came with me as moral support. Seeing my parents was shocking. They looked much older than they should, like the last few years had aged them 10 years. My dad, who'd Always been robust and strong, looked thin and hunched. My mom had completely white hair and deep wrinkles. We sat down, and there was an uncomfortable silence at first. Finally, my dad spoke and said they were very sorry for how they'd treated me, that I'd been right all along about Megan, that they'd been blind and foolish. My mom was crying, saying they'd lost everything, not just the house and money, but also both their children, though for very different reasons. That now they understood I'd only tried to help, and that they chose to believe the wrong person. I'm not going to lie, part of me wanted to tell them to screw themselves, that it was too late for apologies. But another part of me, the part that had wanted their approval my whole life, felt sorry. I told them I appreciated the apology, but that the damage was done, that we couldn't go back to how we were before because we'd never been good in the first place, and that I'd lived my whole life being second best, and that wasn't fixed, with an apology. My dad nodded and said he understood, that they didn't expect me to forgive them or for us to have a close relationship again. They just wanted me to know they recognized their mistakes. My mom asked about Megan, if I knew where she was. I told them yes, that she was in the same city as me, working at McDonald's, and that she'd escaped from an abusive relationship with Noah. My parents looked devastated with that information too. I asked them what economic situation they were in exactly. They told me they lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a bad area, that their pension barely covered food and rent, that they didn't have proper health insurance or emergency savings. That extended family had helped them a bit at first, but everyone had their own problems and couldn't support them indefinitely. Rachel and I talked that night about what to do. We decided we'd help them financially, but in a limited way. We weren't going to ruin our own finances, but we could help them move to a better place and cover some basic needs. We got them a 2-bedroom apartment in a safer area and paid 6 months' rent in advance to give them time to stabilize. We also helped them with basic furniture and medical expenses they had pending. But I made it clear to them that our relationship wasn't going to be like before, that I wasn't going to be going to family dinners or celebrating holidays together, that this help was because they were my parents and had been victims of fraud, but that emotionally I needed to keep my distance. They accepted it. I think they understood. They had no right to ask for more. As for Megan, I gave her information about shelters for domestic violence victims, helplines, free legal resources, everything I could find. But I told her clearly I wasn't going to give her money or let her into my life again. That she'd made decisions that destroyed a lot of people, and now she had to live with the consequences. She tried to manipulate me, saying we were family, and that I was turning my back on her when she needed me most, but I'd already learned not to fall for that. I told her family is people who support you and respect you, not just people you share blood with. As far as I know, Megan is still working at McDonald's and living in a shared apartment with other people. My parents are still in their new apartment, and we talk like once a month, short, superficial conversations. I don't have a close relationship with them, but there's also no active hostility. There's just distance and healthy boundaries that never existed before. Rachel and I are still happy together. We bought our house like 6 months ago. We're talking about having kids soon, and honestly, my life is so much better without the constant family drama. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have forgiven more easily or tried to rebuild a relationship with my parents. But then I remember all the years feeling invisible and less important, and I know the boundaries I set are necessary for my own mental health. The weirdest thing about all this is that for years I thought I was exaggerating, that maybe I was too sensitive or that I really was a bad, envious brother, like Megan said. But seeing how everything exploded, how Megan literally destroyed the same people who always defended her, made me realize I was right all along. It wasn't envy, it wasn't resentment without foundation, it was seeing clearly who Megan was when everyone else decided not to see it. Last week, my parents called me to tell me Megan had tried to contact them asking for money again. I asked them what they'd done, and my dad told me they'd told her no, that they didn't have money to give her and that she needed to fix her own life. I was surprised to hear that, honestly, because I never thought they'd get to the point of denying Megan anything. I guess there's a limit even for favoritism, and stealing their house was that limit. I don't know if Megan is ever going to really change, or if she's going to keep being the same manipulative person she always was. I don't know if my parents and I are ever going to have a genuinely close relationship, or if this is the best we can do. But what I do know is that I made the right decision exposing her years ago, even though at that moment it cost me my family. Because it turns out that family wasn't as valuable as I thought, and building my own life away from all that chaos was the best thing I could have done for myself and for Rachel. And that's enough for me, I guess.